Hi there, it's Tom Morgan here with your weekly update, and it's been a pretty busy week, I think it's fair to say. So let's jump right in. And I think one of the reasons it feels like a very busy week was because on Thursday we had the European Skype for Business user group meeting. Now I've spoken about this a couple of times in the last couple of weeks, leading up to the event itself. It was fantastic to see so many people there in London and so many people from around Europe and on the live stream as well. So if you're one of those people, thanks very much for showing up. It makes a really big difference actually to see to get everyone in the same place and get a real sense of kind of belonging, if you like, across all of Europe. It was a really good event actually. Some really good speakers, some really good subjects got covered. There were a couple of technical hitches, but nothing major and nothing really that detracted from the content. There was some really kind of good content presented as well. So thanks to you that showed up. Honestly, it was a really kind of it was really good to see so many people. So we've got some stats as well now. So over 150 people showed up in person to the events across Europe combined, and more than 600 people were on the live stream. So absolutely fantastic. European Skype for Business user group get together, over 700 people in total. So really great. So thanks to everyone for coming. Thanks to all the speakers. It was fantastic. Thanks to Thomas Poet who had this idea. It was really good. And thanks to all the sponsors as well who made this possible in all of the different countries. So if you missed out on this and you're just finding out about it, or you knew about it and you couldn't show up to the event in person, you can watch the whole broadcast. It is all completely streamed because we use Skype broadcast meeting. So by the power of Skype for Business and Azure, you can go and watch it right now. And you can do that by going to events.ucuser.group/broadcast. And from there, you can click join the event and you can watch the stream. So I definitely would recommend you do that if you weren't on the live stream or you weren't there in person, because there's some cracking content from lots of different really good MVPs. So yeah, that was really good. And that's probably been the reason my week feels busier than normal, perhaps. But there was still lots of other great stuff that went on as well. So let's have a look. The Office Developer Podcast, the Office 365 Developer Podcast. I know I referenced it last week. I'm referencing it again this week because this week they're talking to Bill Bliss about Microsoft Teams development. So that is both useful and pertinent and interesting. So that's why I'm mentioning it. Bill is he's a partner platform architect for Microsoft Teams. So he's founding member of the Microsoft Teams product. So he kind of gets the original idea. He's worked on the execution of that idea, and his focus is really on the development platform and how how that developer platform integrates with the bot framework in Teams. So hugely relevant, hugely interesting. So you should definitely go and listen to that podcast. I have to say, I feel very guilty. I haven't yet listened to that podcast. It is literally the thing I'm going to do after I finish recording this. So yeah, I'm looking forward to that but I know it's worth recommending, even though I haven't even listened to it myself. I know it's worth recommending because Bill Bliss absolutely knows his stuff. So that should be really good. Some interesting news in the week that Microsoft are shutting down CodePlex. Now, this is kind of interesting news to anyone who's been in the development space for a little while, because they'll remember CodePlex starting and remember the whole kind of fanfare around CodePlex. And it was interesting then that it started, and it was started up because it seemed like not quite a Microsoft anti-pattern, but it was certainly slightly out of what the old Microsoft and what you'd necessarily associate them with. But actually, the fact that they are shutting down CodePlex is, for me, a really interesting illustration of how far Microsoft have come in and how much they've changed in being more open, being much more willing to and accepting of existing standards and existing community practices. And this is a great example of Microsoft saying, you know what, we set up CodePlex as a code sharing repository. Actually, it turns out, the world uses GitHub, so you know what, we're going to use GitHub too, and we're going to shut down CodePlex, and we're just going to use GitHub instead. And then that's a big, bold move for a company like Microsoft, and it's interesting, and I think it's time. You hear a lot of, so I listen to a lot of different podcasts from different spaces, so not just the Microsoft space. So I listen to Apple podcasts as well. I listen to open source podcasts, and I talk to those guys as well. And you see it in community groups as well. There's the kind of diehard anti Microsoft vein sometimes still, and I think it's time now that some of that got reevaluated against the reality of what's going on in Microsoft at the moment. So I think this is an interesting milestone. It's an interesting reflection point to say, Microsoft are full in on GitHub, and look how much they are open sourcing their stack. Look how much they are open sourcing the things they're doing today. So I think that's really interesting. All right, so some weekend reading for you, and apologies, I know this weekly update is a little bit later than I would like. I definitely didn't have any time to do it on Friday, and I thought I'd get time to do it yesterday, and that just didn't happen. So we are now Sunday, but you may still get a chance for a little weekend reading. If not, maybe it's your Monday reading. And that's a conversation with Yoshua Bengio, who's he advises Microsoft on AI, and specifically, this is an interview with him talking about deep learning, and it's interesting. It's interesting if you're into AI and where that's going. Deep learning is a kind of subset of that, so that's interesting as well. But it's really interesting to see where Microsoft are going and how much investment they're putting into AI and how much thinking they're doing. And we get little snippets of that in interviews like this and in pitches like this. And so it's a really interesting. It's an interesting interview anyway, but it's interesting as well for what it tells us about where Microsoft are going and what they think is important. So that's definitely worth a read. So a little bit of a house ad, I guess. There's a good video from Modality Systems, who are my employers. So Tom Arbuthnot, who's another MVP in this space. I'm sure you all know Tom's name. He is talking to Graham Hoskins from Microsoft. They're talking about the Skype for Business call center experience. So if you're in the Skype for Business development world, then you will be more or less in this kind of contact center capability world as well. It's a big ask of developers. It often comes up. It's a really important integration piece in many Skype for Business deployments. So really understanding the capabilities that are out there today, understanding what can be done, what the different scenarios are, and how they fit into your particular business requirements is crucial, I think, for any kind of developer, especially if let's say perchance you've just been tasked with creating a contact center experience. You absolutely need to understand the stuff that's out there today. That's a first step in any requirement gathering session. So good video to look at, go through the different models and the different complexities and the advantages and disadvantages of each one. So I'll put a blog to that in the notes as well. So that's interesting. And I think that kind of pretty much wraps it up for news. The only other thing I kind of saw happening this week, and referencing my sort of earlier earlier point about trying to keep on top of everything that's happening in the industry, and that's always hard, but you kind of try your best. Over at the Verge, Walt Mossberg is retiring in June. So Walt is he's 70 this year, and yeah, he's going to be hanging up his writing pen, if that's a thing journalists do when they retire, in June. And he's been covering journalism, covering the IT industry. I want to say for something ridiculous like 30 years, maybe, maybe more. I go and read the article again. I've completely forgotten, but he brings a great deal of depth and insight around the history of things and why things happen. And he predominantly he covered Microsoft in the kind of big reign of the 90s. He's covered Apple. He covered the iPhone launch. He's covered this whole industry end to end through some really interesting innovations and movements. And our industry is still very young. It's a really young industry. So these people that have been in it for the long term, who've been in it for decades, they have really interesting insights. They have really interesting points of view. And if you want to understand the future of technology, you need to listen to these people. You need to be hearing what they say, because they can bring all that decades of experience, and they've seen this stuff happen again and again. Technologies, innovation cycle, these things go in trends. They go in troughs and peaks. So these guys have seen it 3 or 4 times now. So they see things coming, and they know how it's going to play out. So yeah, Walt Mossberg, he currently does a podcast on The Verge called Control Walt Delete. He is editor-in-chief at Recode. He does a number of other pieces for The Verge. I definitely encourage you, if you've never heard his name before, I totally encourage you to go and check out some of his stuff. One of the nice things about the internet is his stuff won't be going away just because he's retiring, but he will be sorely missed, I think. He's a great sage for kind of what's happening in tech. So, all right, that's enough from me. I apologize that this is slightly later than usual in the week. I will try and do better next time, but I'm not going to promise it. But for whatever is left of your weekend, have a great one, and I will speak to you again next week.